So in this video, we're going to discuss the concept of temporary non-resident when it comes to being an expat from the UK and how does the HMRC treats a temporary non-resident person. Today we are joined by Laura Sent, who is a partner at LSR Partners, and to whom we will discuss this concept in detail. So Laura, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me as always, Shiraz.
So Laura, can you start with this idea of what is a temporary non-resident?
Thanks, Shiraz. From HMRC's perspective, temporary non-residence is effectively an anti-avoidance measure that was introduced to prevent people who are traditionally UK tax resident from leaving the UK for a relatively short period of time and allowing them or preventing them from obtaining tax relief that is available to UK tax non-residents. Temporary non-residence would affect somebody who has been a UK tax resident in at least 4 out of the 7 previous tax years prior to the year of departure from the UK. And assuming that those conditions are met, then from HMRC's perspective, you would be considered a temporary non-resident if you were outside of the UK for less than five complete years.
Thank you. And can you also advise, like, what are the implications to someone who gets classified as a temporary non-resident?
No worries. So, if you are considered temporary non-resident, then there are certain types of income and gains that may be considered not taxable whilst you are a non-resident. And what would happen if you are temporary non-resident is that once you return back to the UK, those gains, those income sources would effectively crystallise upon your return to the UK. So you could end up with an unwanted tax liability upon your return.
Okay, and can you also maybe touch upon more on what sort of incomes and gains can be classified into this
Not a problem.
scheme? Yeah.
So there are probably three main areas I would say in terms of items of income and or gains that would fall within this the scope of this temporary non-residence. So the first would be capital gains tax. So in the UK, we have a bit of an all or nothing system. So if you're a UK tax resident, the starting point is you would be taxable on any crystallised gain, whether you were fully in the UK for the period that the gain was kind of accruing over, or whether you spent some time out of the UK. If you're a UK tax non-resident, the only assets that are really likely to impact and create a capital gain for you whilst you are a UK tax non-resident is the disposal, whether that be direct or indirect, of UK land and property. Any other gains, for example, such as crypto assets or investment portfolios, they would sit outside the scope of taxation. So potentially people who leave the UK might realise significant gains and not need to pay tax in the UK on those gains. As I said, if you're a temporary non-resident, however, those gains would fall back in the scope of UK taxation upon your return to the UK. The second source of income and or gains that might be affected by temporary non-residents is kind of profits that have built up within limited companies, close companies, where the owners have left the UK. So potentially that money could be extracted whilst non-resident at little to no tax cost. Um, if that were to be the case, then anything that hadn't been taxed whilst non-resident would fall back within the scope of UK taxation upon return to the UK. And the final one that we tend to come across quite a lot is pension income. Now, the starting point, if you have a UK pension income when you are a UK tax non-resident, is that pension income is UK sourced and would be considered taxable in the UK. However, when it comes to pension income, a lot of it will depend on the country in which you travel to, and a number of countries have double tax treaty agreements with the UK that says that the pension would be taxable in the country in which you are resident in, rather than the country where the pension's from. So if you were to take drawdowns or lump sums rather than kind of regular payments from your pension, then once again, if you were to take those whilst non-resident and temporary non-resident, those would fall back within the scope of UK taxation upon return to the UK.
Thank you for that detailed explanation, Laura. So I think my next question would be, um, what are the triggers that can that classifies a person to be a temporary non-resident as per the HMRC? Because you know, people who are flying out of the UK, and their idea is that they will be staying extended amount of time outside of the UK with the specific idea that they're not tax residents in the UK, and they don't have to pay back taxes in the UK and actually stay a tax resident of the country that they're staying.
So effectively, the kind of temporary non-residence will happen if you are not solely resident, or kind of if you are not resident in the UK or not solely resident in the UK for less than 5 years. Um, Obviously, in some instances, people will be aware that they only intend to leave the UK for a relatively short period of time. Um, and for those people, they may wish to take opportunities, but they may decide that actually there's little to no tax efficiencies for kind of taking those approaches, and as a result, they'll choose not to do certain things because they are aware that they would be temporary non-resident. For other people, they may intend to stay out for longer than 5 years, and their plans might change. In terms of the kind of the trigger points, so we have, from a UK tax perspective, it's when you are considered to become non-resident. So, for example, if you were leaving the UK midway through a year and you were becoming considered, you kind of had split year treatment. To allow you to break residence during the year, the kind of the period of non-residence would start from the date that you become a UK tax non-resident, and the period of temporary non-residence would kind of end on the date that you become resident or solely resident in the UK again. Once again, taking into consideration split year treatment. Now, split year treatment isn't the most straightforward. There are 3 different ways to split the year on the way out of the UK, and there are 5 different ways to split the year on the way into the UK. So you may kind of have a quick look through and intend to split the year by means of one case, but if you don't get the rules right, then potentially your year might split at a date that you didn't want it to split. So if you are looking at split year treatment, it's always worth speaking to a UK tax residency specialist.
And what do you see that? What are some common misconceptions that people might have when it comes to this concept of temporary non-residents?
Okay, so there's a number of things that people might not be aware of in terms of temporary non-residents. Firstly, people just not being aware of temporary non-residents is something that crops up. Um, the other kind of big misconception that we have is people's just lack of understanding in terms of UK tax residents. So in the UK, we use something called the statutory residence test to determine your UK tax residence position. It's a series of tests, and a lot of people band around kind of, I can spend up to 90 days in the UK during a tax year, and almost assume that that's a flat mark, and they can do that, and they can do whatever they want whilst they're in the UK. There are various things that will trip that up, such as working too much in the UK, having a home in the UK whilst you don't have a home outside of the UK, having too many ties to the UK. So, so we do get people who seem to maybe misinterpret the statutory residence test, and that can end up potentially um, triggering temporary non-residence when somebody maybe genuinely doesn't intend for that to be the case. The other thing that we sometimes see are people who don't understand how they should be taxed as a non-resident, or potentially aren't aware of treaty reliefs that may be available to them. So they actually tax themselves as if they were a UK tax resident, for example, with capital gains on asset disposals, or with UK pension extractions, whereby the double tax treaty would actually afford taxing rights to the country of residence instead. So we do get quite a few people who maybe could be eligible for tax reliefs that aren't aware that they're entitled to those.
Well, thank you, Laura, for providing us with your detailed input on the topic.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I think that's it for today. If any of the viewers who wants to get in touch with myself or Laura, the links would be in the description below to discuss potentially becoming a UK non-resident or setting up your residencies, business, and banking in Dubai, and exiting the UK tax system. Feel free to get in touch. That's all for today, and we'll see you in the next video.